Hello everybody, I hope you guys are all doing super well. So today I want to take you guys through a topic that I get asked about all the time, and it's what are you using to strip your house, Caleb? The thing is, with that question, there are 1,000 ways to answer it because it really depends on the situation. Certain paints, I will use a certain kind of stripper. Certain materials that the paint is on also require a different type of stripper. So I have three really to talk about today. They are the ones I use for exterior and hard lead paints, one I use for interior and softer, more modern paints, and the third I use for masonry and plaster overall generally. So let me walk you through what each product is and why I use it for each individual application. Let's get into it. First up, one you guys have seen a lot on the channel, which is a really funny named product. It is called Cooper's Strip Club. Yes, funny name, great product though. This stuff comes out of New Zealand and is one of the stronger strippers I use as far as chemicals are concerned. And around the table here, you'll see some of the tools that I use while I'm using said product. Main one being, of course, gloves. You need gloves because this chemical will burn your hands. It is not a pleasant feeling. And get nitrile ones, do not get latex. This stuff will eat latex gloves. Steel wool is always something you need with this stuff. Once you're done scraping the main layer, steel wool really comes in handy with getting the last little bit of paint off. And then various scrapers. Usually for something like this, I would use something that you pull across the grain of the wood, not gouge into the wood, but sometimes little odds and ends and shapes are nice to have. But something like this is much preferred. Now this is a funny little profile on it. I have a few of these different types. But these work really nice because you can pull against the grain of the wood and you don't end up gouging it really bad. Now, yes, I have used other chemical strippers other than Cooper's, things like Citrus Strip here in the US or Jasco's. Both take a very long time to work and usually have to wrap them in some sort of plastic, saran wrap paper, something to keep the stripper wet for longer and allow it to work longer because it needs more time. This stuff's almost instant on a lot of types of paint. Not all types of paint, but on a lot of types. The other positive with this stuff is it's extremely thin, so you can use a spray bottle to spray it on. Whereas most other strippers on the market are a thick gel, which can be nice in some applications, but most of the time it's just more of a mess than it's worth. Also, this stuff will do what something like Citrus Strip will do in 2 or 3 days. This will do it in 2 or 3 minutes. So if you value your time, this is a much better solution than Citrus Strip. Now for wooden products, this is one of the options I use. The other option is this. This is a Cobra speed heater. It's an infrared heater, so it heats the paint up and you scrape away. One thing to make for sure that you're always wearing while you're using this is a respirator. Paints are chemical compounds. They contain very nasty things, and this will produce a little bit of smoke sometimes. You do not want to be breathing that. It can be very bad for you. Now the main difference between this and a conventional heat gun, this is actually a much lower temperature, so you don't have as much risk of burning your piece and you don't have as much risk of fire. So this is a much simpler, more easy tool to use, and to be honest with you, I think it is somewhat faster. Now I can't tell you why it's faster, it just seems to be. For simply just wood, these are the two main products I use. Cooper's I tend to use more on interior pieces, such as this piece of millwork right here, which is up from the library. The Cobra speed heater I tend to use on harder exterior paints. The reason I would choose Cooper's on something like this and not on something like this is because it has a really hard time taking a lot of paint off of something like this. And I'll show you exactly what I mean by that here in a minute with an example. But for interior finishes, if I were to use something like the speed heater, I have a very big risk of burning something like this, especially with these really fine details, and I really don't want to have a singed piece of trim in my house. Now if you use a bit more finesse, you can actually use something like this for this piece of trim, but it would take a lot of practice not to singe your wood. So let's get into the first example. I'm going to show you guys Cooper's first, and then I'll show you the speed heater, and you'll be able to see with an example why I use which for which. So with the Coopers in about 10 minutes, this is what I achieved with both pieces. Now on this piece of trim, which realistically only had about 2 layers of paint on it, it makes very, very quick work. You can see in the time lapse that the paint immediately bubbled up and comes off pretty quickly. Now I could do a better job in these grooves, but there's one tool that is extremely crucial to getting that paint out of those grooves, and that would be a brass brush such as this. You see this one got clogged up pretty bit. It's a used one that I've had lying around. If I had a few more of these, this would come completely clean really quickly, super easy. Now, brass brush, never steel brush. A steel brush will mess up your wood severely, but a brass one is gentle enough to not cause any damage. Same thing with areas like this where you have old nail holes or scratches or scuffs. When the paint gets in those little grooves, brass brush is the way to go. The steel wool helps a little bit as well. So you can kind of scrub down the piece of wood, get that last little bit of residual paint out of the grain itself. It's especially helpful when I've stripped oak, because oak is a very open grained wood, and you get little bits of paint down into the grain, and it helps a lot to get it all out of there. Now we move over to the corbel. Now this has very old lead paint on it. This was an exterior corbel. It's actually from a house down the street that they unfortunately tore down. When they were doing so, I went to the pile and see if I can get a few pieces, and they were okay with selling me all the corbels. So I have, I don't know, a handful of these corbels. And so I just had this one lying around, but this is very, very, very close to the same paint, if not the exact same paint that I have on the exterior of my building. And therefore, this is a good example of the stuff that I clean up on the Mansard roof, on all the windows outside, everything. All of this is the same sort of paint. It's old linseed oil lead-based paint. And as you can see, this one sat for a considerably longer time than the Coopers that was on that. Probably about, well, 8 or 9 minutes, which if I did leave for longer would probably have done a slightly better job. But simply put, it takes quite a while to eat through this paint, and it takes many applications to really get through it. So Coopers is super duper fast on the thinner paints. Not so great on this really old caked on hard stuff. So as you can see, Cobra speed heater, 5-10 minutes. We've got a pretty nice surface to work with. Now, as you can see with the Coopers, after you're done, no need to sand it. Super nice in that respect. With this, with the Cobra speed heater, there's absolutely a need to sand it. And you can see some scorch marks, which of course is not a problem on a corbel that will get painted again, but would absolutely be a problem on this beautiful piece of trim. I also did try to get a little bit off here. It does work, and you can make it work for paint like this. However, when you start getting into really narrow sections and grooves like this, it's going to be very, very hard to get all of the paint out of there without scorching the wood, which again, be very bad on an interior piece of trim, but really does speed up the work for exterior hard lead paint. So those are the 2 reasons I would pick one over the other. So that's how I handle wood. Let's talk now about masonry and plaster. So over here, hanging out in the corner, we have Peel Away 1. Peel Away 1 is a very thick paste-like stripper that I use on masonry and plaster. If you follow the channel, you'll know I use this all the time, especially on the stone facade we have here on the house. And while I absolutely hate using this stuff, it does work, and it does work fairly well. So you apply the paste, you put on a piece of paper, a special piece of paper that has some form of plastic on one side of it. You wait 2 days, you come back, scrape it off, and then in my case, I use a greatly reduced PSI pressure washer to blast away the rest of the residual paint and of course stripper. Now, why I won't use Coopers on stone or plaster is because it is so thin that it'll automatically just suck into whatever you're stripping. and basically immediately loses all of its stripping capability. The speed heater, it equally does nothing to stone. I think its big problem is it works really well on wood because there's moisture in wood. There's always some level of hydration in lumber. And your speed heater will heat up that hydration, making the layers of the paint delaminate from the wood itself, allowing you to pull it away. Now, don't quote me on that. That's just what I am assuming is going on. I don't actually know any science behind it. And Speed Heater or Cobra hasn't posted exactly why it doesn't work on stone, but even on their site they say it will not work very well on stone. I will say out of the 3 chemicals, this is the one that hurts the most if you get it on you. When I use it, I have to wear some sort of sweatsuit or Tyvek suits to keep it off of my body. It will almost essentially slowly eat away at your skin. It's really gnarly, and then of course you have to pressure wash it, which means you're wet. It is not a fun experience. However, like I said, it does work. It does do fairly well. People have asked me why I use something like this over something like sandblasting or media blasting of any sort. The reason you use this on masonry as opposed to that is because sandblasting is very, very damaging to stone, especially the type of stone I have on the front of my building, which is limestone. Limestone is pretty soft, and you can see how brittle the stone already is. Imagine hitting that with an extremely high PSI stream of sand or whatever media. Even something as benign as something like dry ice blasting, I think would be too much for it. Plus, I've done some dry ice blasting in the past and was not terribly impressed with the results. So essentially the same thing with plaster. You just need to be very, very careful in how you remove it from plaster. Obviously, we have very delicate plaster details here in this house. That's where things like picks, dental picks and the like come in really useful, and also the use of toothbrushes and water, of course. Now, why I don't use this stuff on wood is A, it is extremely messy, extremely caustic, and I've heard from other people that you can actually turn your wood weird colors with it. I've even heard of people having their wood turn purple, which would be absolutely horrible unless that's a wood stain that you're going for. I'm not, so I would rather keep my wood the color it's supposed to be. So yeah, for that reason, I don't apply it to wood. I imagine it'd be fine, again, for something that you're doing on an exterior of a building. But again, if you're using an exterior, I definitely would go for the speed heater. It just seems to make life a whole lot easier for things on the exterior. You can also get a larger speed heater as well if you're doing something like wood siding or something like that. I went for the more detail-oriented thing because I have things like dental molding and other fine details on the outside of my building that require a bit more finesse than a giant heater. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Just joking, but thank you guys so much for being here. I hope this information was helpful to you all. I know it's a question I get asked a lot, and I finally feel like I've had enough experience with all different types of strippers to at least give you guys an informed opinion on what I feel is the best method for each type of paint, and essentially what I've been doing here at the house. This isn't the end-all be-all of strippers. I'm sure there are 1,000 things that I am missing that are better, but these are the methods I use, and they seem to work quite well and without too many issues. So, as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys have an incredible rest of your week, and I'll see you guys again very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.